According to all known laws of transportation, there is no way a snail should be able to drive. Its code is too slimy to get its fat little body to move. The snail, of course, moves anyway, because snails don't care what humans think is impossible. And I guess they can also talk and act as evil sidekicks in the best Nintendo-owned anime I've yet to cover on my channel, and one of them would even go on to star in DreamWorks' very own Turbo, a Power Rangers movie. This 2013 animated family film stars the titular character Turbo, aka Theo, embarking on a mission to fulfill his dream of becoming the greatest race car driver there ever was, despite his obvious handicap of being a snail. That's really all you need to know from the premise to decide on whether you would be interested in seeing this film or not. It was a great period of experimentation for DreamWorks around this time, where they were dipping their toes into different franchises to kickstart, such as The Croods and Rise of the Guardians, which worked out incredibly well without exception. I've seen people criticize this film for, or saying that they didn't watch it because of this premise alone, which makes sense since it definitely doesn't scream creative genius coming up with it, but that has never stopped Cars from being successful either, and believe it or not, that's mostly what DreamWorks wants their movies to be. I was 14 when this film was released, right around the time where making fun of any new movie in cinema was considered good form, especially animated ones, so you can bet my friends and I were right there day one to check out what must have been the dumbest concept at the time, aside from us possibly ever ending up not talking anymore and spending every last minute together. So if you're watching this, you still owe me $5, dude. Come on, we've been over this. But even though I wasn't really the target demographic at the time, and admittedly set out to find as many flaws with this film as possible, I just couldn't bring myself to do it. It was just too much fun. How is it then that whenever I bring up this film, people either start laughing at me or straight up not even having heard of it? I may have an explanation for the former, but was Turbo really that forgettable? Why is it that the sole reason I even felt motivated to do this video was finding the art book for literally $2 at Forbidden Planet? That can't be right. I can't be the only one that has a soft spot for this film. As God is my witness, I will convince you all that Turbo is a severely underrated DreamWorks film, and you will all wish it had turned into one of their flagship franchises instead of motherfucking Boss Baby. Speaking of VPN servers, today's video is brought to you by NordVPN. If you're anything like me or my buddy Turbo over here, you enjoy things going fast and yet smoothly anytime I go online, alright? When I lived in Japan, I used to watch tons of local game shows and drama series to help with my studies, and as soon as I came back, I had to realize that shoot, now I have to wait another few months for them to maybe possibly bring a dub over here someday, which I then have to sign up for another subscription service for. Why go through all that hassle when NordVPN can teleport you to any place you want to be at in the world? Like that. I'm talking over 60 countries worldwide with no data logging whatsoever that ensures a completely encrypted and safe trip that allows for up to 6 simultaneous connections at once. So no, you don't have to exclusively weep out in Japan, you can just as easily do it in Denmark or North Dakota, though I'm not sure that's even a real place. I really can't stress enough how helpful Nord has already been for me in finding footage from shows simply not available around here, and also ensuring that I don't get tracked while doing any of it. But that's not all. NordVPN now offers you a full 75% off a 3-year plan on their site and an additional entirely free month after that. You simply have to go to nordvpn.org/Cosmodore and use the code Cosmodore at checkout. You can use it on your phone, computer, or even as a browser extension to never worry about your data getting tracked ever again. Once again, that's nordvpn.org/Cosmodore and Cosmodore at checkout. So the movie opens up with this incredibly cool racing sequence featuring all these epic shots of flags waving about, crowds going wild, and a confident young Lightning McQueen leaving his trailer to face his opponents. It's a great way to introduce the viewer to the sense of speed this film is going for without showing off too much just yet, by immediately contrasting it with Theo entering the screen in his dimly lit, worn down garage. I think it's really charming and also nonchalantly introduces us to totally harmless and absolutely not soon to be main villain of the film, Guy Garnier. Our boy Theo, who for simplicity's sake I'm just gonna call Turbo from now on, dedicated his whole life to becoming exactly like his idol Garnier, but his brother Chet is having none of it. He's basically the contrarian. You can't actually achieve your dreams simply by believing in yourself archetype that they don't really expand on during the film, but luckily he never gets too distracting. It's not like in Chicken Little, where in addition to not believing in his dreams or anything, he's also a total dickweed, but they have some genuine brotherly chemistry. It's good that they do too, because otherwise I fear they might not be able to survive what is literally a minefield of potential crow attacks
attacks right at the tomato field they live at. One night, as all the failure and disgrace at his own home simply got too much for him, Turbo sets out to get inspiration from the race cars at the freeway nearby. But as fate would have it, he gets thrown right into one's engine, and as the nitrous oxide fills his veins, his molecules get all rearranged, and now he's gonna race them all, cause that is literally the first thing he does with the kid next door, but also destroys the tomato field in the process. With him and his brother exiled, he puts his newfound powers to good use by killing the very crow that took away Chat. What, do you think that's gruesome? You haven't seen nothing yet. So stranded in the middle of nowhere, the two have to now find a way back home, which gets taken care of them for them as they get snagged by taco stand owner Tito, who uses them as the latest specimen for a snail racing competition. That's also where we meet the other snails, including Byrne, voiced by Maya Rudolph, Samuel L. Jackson as Whiplash, Sonic himself, and even Snoop Doggy Dogg aka Lion aka Snail now. And the human characters are no joke either. We got Michael Pena, Michelle Rodriguez, one of the multiple ties to the Fast and the Furious films, Paul Giamatti, Bill Hader, Luis Guzman, and even that guy who said gay once. It's also of note that after The Croods, this was the second time Ryan Reynolds would lend his voice to one of the main characters in a DreamWorks film, and also starred in another film called Ripped that came out the same week. Essentially, this was back when Detective Deadpool himself really wanted to make you forget Green Lantern ever happened, which I can't really blame him for, and I'd also be lying if I said his voice didn't fit. Turbo isn't the most memorable main character in traits alone, but in scenes like this one really gets to show off what lies beneath the surface. I mean, just look at this. The composition and action in many scenes in this film is really incredible for just being another DreamWorks film. Whereas their other recent film Rise of the Guardians tried way too hard to look realistic, here they went with a more mixture between real life environments, cartoony characters, and even more cartoony snails, but somehow strung it together quite nicely if you ask me. Much of the film is also set at night, a great choice both to show off the LA setting and make the snails' illuminated slime trails stand out against the pitch black night. It's awesome. A whole new problem arises though, as Tito's brother Angelo will have none of his siblings' plans to refurbish their restaurant into a snail farm, but at least manages to get the other store owner support through almost killing a bunch of tourists to get them to check out Turbo's skills. And so they all decide to help Turbo fulfill his dream by signing him up to the Indy 500. Understandably, the other drivers and audience aren't yet convinced letting a snail partake in a competition designed for moving vehicles 10,000 times his size is a good idea, however. But one track later, Turbo sees himself as the star of commercials, game shows, news reports, and even Shmo Yoho videos. All thanks to the greatest voice clip ever put to film.
Whoa! That snail is fast!
Gets me every time. I wish I could play you the actual song resulting in all this, as it was by far the moment in the film my friend and I quoted the most and would listen to on a daily basis for like a year. It's so over the top ridiculous, loud, and filled with those sweet dubstep sounds you simply don't get to hear anymore these days. This video will most likely get copyright claimed if I were to include it though, so just click the card to the upper right and it'll take you right to That Snail is Fast. Dang, I just realized Turbo has made me nostalgic for dubstep. And Deadpool 2 also had dubstep as a theme. It's all coming together now. So all this publicity and a pep talk from Kanye, of course, is all it takes for the race committee to sign Turbo up as a contestant, and you know what that means. Twist Valentine, baby!
Crawl home, Garden Snail.
A very friendly and delicate villain. He's some pretty fierce competition for Hans as the most unnecessary villain in any animated movie of the past decade. Both of them leaving no lasting impact, their ulterior motives come completely out of nowhere, but with Kanye it's even weirder because there legitimately is no reason for him to be a villain because, well, Turbo would have had to race against him anyway. They could have cut out this entire scene of him trying to scare Turbo off entirely, and if anything, Turbo's struggle would have been even more believable since he'd have to face off against the guy that inspired him to even take on racing in the first place. I don't know, this just kinda seems like a pointless reveal, but luckily almost immediately cuts to the competition itself, with the usual great action shots and close-ups I loved about the other scenes in the film. For lack of a better term, the struggle is real, and you can tell that Turbo tries his hardest to keep up with the other races, leading up to a legit powerful scene where he has to find all the strength his past failures have equipped him with, but all of it is not enough to prevent the inevitable. More death! Yay! But of course, everyone involved has miraculously survived, and even Kanye is there to challenge Turbo to a final race to the finish line, where after all the snails get integrated into society, the kid from earlier and everyone else who doubted them makes peace with the mollusks, Snailian sale number skyrocket, SpongeBob SquarePants gets renamed to Gary the Snail, and the national anthem gets replaced with That Snail is Fast. And hot dang, I forgot just how much I love this movie. I will admit that much of this comes down to it being a guilty pleasure of mine, as some of the characters can can be a tad forgettable, and the snail puns straight up sickening after a while, but you have to admit that those racing scenes were pretty rad. Compare that to Cars, where all that film's intent was clearly to sell as much plastic garbage as possible and was therefore more concerned with throwing every last cartoon trope in car form in there and producing an actually captivating story or cool action scenes for that matter, as in my opinion, at least the ones to be found here were far more tight, visually appealing, and also don't distract from the plot, which was predictable, yes, but more than an improvement upon the Croods, for instance. The side characters also didn't feel like an afterthought, but in many ways were the main selling point in terms of comic relief, especially the Vietnamese nail salon owner from next door, and of course, the Snoop. He even released a movie tie-in track called Let the Bass Go, which would go on to become one of the most hated songs in this library, which I can only imagine is because he wasn't allowed to reference weed. And because it's a bad song. Something else that was released alongside the film was the first animated Netflix series for kids called Turbo Fast, that takes place immediately after the events of the film and ditches a 3D art style in favor of this weird, brightly colored flash animated eyesore that the Mr. Peabody and Sherman show would also utilize later on. It took a while to get used to, but doesn't seem bad by any means. But then again, 3 seasons were a bit too much for me to take in at once, so I can't really give my in-depth opinion on the show, and I doubt anyone really cares. Snoop may have been replaced by Phil Lamar, but one, it's Phil Lamar, and second, his character still gets many chances to shine, just like many of the other sidekicks finally get fleshed out beyond just being comic reliefs. It does what a show like this should, and doesn't hurt the film's reputation or anything, unlike the video game, but let's not talk about that one. And that's about all I have to say about Turbo. It remains one of my personal guilty pleasures in the DreamWorks library, and beyond that, also features many elements people tend to overlook and elevate it beyond just being another cash grab for the summer. If you're in it for a fast, emotional, and somewhat cheesy yet fun ride with a fantastic voice cast and don't mind the kinda dumb premise, then I'd say you can't really go wrong here. So I'm really glad I got to make this video because between you and me, I've been dying to get out of that office. PBS,